Welcome to Spicy Family Scandals, where real-life drama meets hard-earned wisdom. Today's story is about betrayal, resilience, and the power of standing up for yourself. Let's dive in.
It started with a laugh. Not the kind that warms a room, but one that chills it, a sharp, biting sound that cut through the air like glass shattering on tile. I stood there, my hand gripping the edge of the dinner table so tightly that my knuckles turned white, every muscle in my body begging me to leave. But I didn't. Not yet. Linda, my mother-in-law, leaned back in her chair with the smug satisfaction of someone who believed she had just delivered a winning blow. Her words still echoed in my mind, cruel and calculated, each syllable crafted to wound. "You're nothing but a burden to my son. He deserves better than this." Her eyes flicked to me, lingering just long enough to let the venom sink in. She didn't need to say more, she never did. Her power came from her precision, jabs that cut deep and left wounds only I seemed to notice. Across the table, James sat frozen, his fork suspended midair, his eyes glued to his plate. He didn't say a word, not a single damn word. The silence stretched on, unbearable and suffocating, like the calm before a storm. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my vision blurring as heat surged to my face. I willed myself to breathe, to keep my composure, but Linda wasn't done. She tilted her head, feigning innocence, and smirked as she added, "Don't take it personally, dear. It's just the truth." The audacity of her words snapped something inside me. But I didn't scream, and I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I pushed my chair back slowly, the screech of wood against the floor slicing through the oppressive quiet. I stood up, my legs trembling but steady enough to carry me away from the battlefield Linda had turned her dining room into. "Excuse me," I managed, my voice low and tight, betraying the fury that threatened to consume me. I didn't wait for anyone to respond. I walked upstairs to the bathroom, closed the door, and locked it. In the mirror, I saw someone I didn't recognize. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes glassy, my breath ragged. The hurt was there, yes, but beneath it was something sharper, darker. It was anger.
No, Raj.
A fire I had smothered for years, now burning hotter than ever. I had endured Linda's condescension, her passive-aggressive remarks, and her outright disdain for too long. And James, my husband, the man who promised to stand by me, had sat there, silent and complicit. My mind raced as I pressed my palms against the sink, my reflection blurring as tears filled my eyes. For the first time, I didn't feel weak. I felt something else entirely. That night, the house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows. James came to bed later than usual, probably hoping I'd already be asleep. He slipped under the covers without a word, his side of the mattress dipping slightly. I kept my back to him, my breathing steady, pretending I didn't feel the chasm between us. But I wasn't asleep. My mind was a storm, replaying the events of dinner like a broken record. Linda's words, James's silence, and that laugh, it all looped endlessly, each cycle stoking the flames of my anger. I stared into the darkness, my chest tightening with the realization that this wasn't just about one night. It wasn't even about Linda.
It was about me.
About how I had let this happen. How I had tried so hard to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, that I'd lost pieces of myself along the way. The minutes dragged into hours. I lay there, my hands gripping the edge of the blanket, a single question consuming me. What would they do if I were gone? The thought was a flicker at first, faint and fleeting. But it grew. It took root. By the time the clock struck 3 a.m., it wasn't just a thought anymore. It was a plan. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake James. My movements were deliberate, quiet, almost mechanical. I grabbed my phone and walked to the guest room, closing the door behind me. In the faint glow of the screen, I began typing a message to my best friend, Rachel. "Me, are you awake?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Rachel, of course. What's wrong?" Rachel knew everything about Linda, about James, about the years I'd spent biting my tongue and shrinking myself to fit into their lives. She had begged me more than once to stand up for myself, to stop letting them walk all over me. Tonight, I was finally ready to listen. Me, can I stay with you for a few days? Her answer came before I even had time to doubt myself. Rachel, I'll pick you up in the morning. That was all I needed. I started packing. Not everything, just enough to get by for a few days. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop. I moved like a ghost, gliding through the house, careful not to disturb the man who had vowed to protect me, but sat silent when I needed him most. Before I left, I wrote a note. A single piece of paper left on the kitchen counter, where I knew James would find it when he stumbled downstairs in the morning, confused and bleary-eyed. Since I'm such a burden, I'll remove myself from your lives. Good luck. I placed the pen down with a finality that surprised me. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. For the first time in years, I felt calm. As I waited by the window for Rachel's car to pull up, I looked around the house. The photos on the walls, the furniture we picked out together, the life I thought we were building, it all felt foreign now. Like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The headlights appeared in the driveway, and I stepped outside without hesitation. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Whatever happened next, it was their turn to feel my absence. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains in Rachel's guest room. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the weight of Linda's judgment or James's indifference pressing down on me. Instead, there was a strange lightness in my chest, a quiet thrill of defiance mixed with a lingering fear of the unknown. Rachel, ever the early riser, greeted me in the kitchen with a steaming cup of coffee and a knowing look. "How are you feeling?" she asked, sliding the mug toward me. I took a sip, letting the warmth settle me. "Free," I admitted, but also unsure. She nodded, her expression softening. "That's normal. They'll figure it out. And if they don't, that's on them." Her confidence bolstered me, but I couldn't shake the nagging questions that lingered in the back of my mind. Would James fight for me? Would Linda double down on her cruelty? Or worse, would they simply move on, proving I had been as insignificant as she claimed? I didn't have to wait long for answers. By midday, my phone lit up with notifications. James's name appeared on the screen over and over again, each message more frantic than the last. "James, where are you? James, we need to talk. James, this is ridiculous."
Come home.
But the one that made my breath catch came hours later.
James, I'm sorry.
"I didn't realize how much you did for me. Please, let's fix this." I stared at the words, my chest tightening. It wasn't just an apology, it was desperation. But a part of me wasn't ready to forgive so easily. Was this about me? Or was he just inconvenienced? The question gnawed at me as I placed the phone face down on the counter, ignoring the vibrations that followed. Rachel glanced at me from the couch, raising an eyebrow. "What's he saying?" "Apologies," I said, my voice flat. "And a lot of them." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "The real question is, what are you going to do about it?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know yet. Instead, I let the silence linger, staring out the window as another message came through. This one wasn't from James. It was from Linda. "Linda, your little stunt has gone too far. James can't handle everything on his own, and I don't have time to clean up after you. Come back and stop acting childish." The audacity of her words sent a jolt through me, sharp and electric. Any lingering guilt I'd felt evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. My stunt, acting childish? She still didn't get it. She still didn't see me. Rachel must have noticed the shift in my expression because she asked, "Linda?" I nodded, tossing her the phone, so she could read the message. Her laugh was incredulous. "She really thinks she can bully you back, doesn't she?" "She does," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "But she's wrong." Rachel grinned. "So, what's the plan?" For the first time that day, I smiled. "I think it's time they realize I'm not coming back so easily. If they wanted to fix this, it wouldn't be on Linda's terms, or even James's. It would be on mine." By the third day, the silence I'd given James and Linda had done its job. My phone had become a battlefield of contrasting messages. James's texts had shifted from pleading to reflective, each one more raw than the last. James, I didn't stand up for you and I should have. I failed you. Please, I need to talk to you in person. Then, another message from Linda, dripping with a faux sweetness that made my skin crawl. Linda, we all say things we don't mean in the heat of the moment. Come home, and let's put this behind us. Behind us? The sheer audacity made me laugh, though there was no humor in it. Linda's entire playbook revolved around control, and now, with the pieces scattered, she didn't know how to proceed. But James's words, they stuck with me, softening the walls I had built around my anger. I couldn't deny that part of me wanted to believe he was sincere. Rachel, ever my voice of reason, interrupted my thoughts as she set down 2 glasses of wine. So, what's the move? Are you going to meet him? I took a sip, savoring the bitter edge of the drink. Maybe, I admitted, but it'll be on my terms. Rachel leaned forward, her grin wicked. Good. Make them sweat a little longer. The next morning, I finally replied to James. I'll meet you. Tonight. Neutral ground. His response was immediate. James, thank you. Tell me when and where. I chose a quiet cafe across town, the kind of place where emotions couldn't boil over without witnesses. The hours leading up to the meeting dragged painfully. I paced the guest room, rehearsing the conversation in my mind. Would he apologize properly? Would he try to downplay everything? The questions swirled, building both anticipation and doubt. When the time came, I arrived early, taking a seat near the window where I could see him coming. James walked in 5 minutes later, his face drawn, his shoulders tense. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. For a moment, my heart softened, but I quickly reminded myself why I was here. Hey, he said, his voice low as he sat across from me. He hesitated before adding, thank you for meeting me. I nodded but didn't speak, waiting, letting the silence work in my favor. James fidgeted, running a hand through his hair. I owe you an apology, he started, his eyes meeting mine. I should have defended you. I should have stopped her. I was a coward, and I see that now. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For the first time in years, I saw vulnerability in him. Not the man who shrugged off Linda's insults, but someone who seemed to finally grasp the gravity of his actions. I've spent the last 3 days realizing just how much I took you for granted, he continued. Cooking, cleaning, everything you do, I never appreciated it. I thought it just happened. But it doesn't. You do it. And, without you, I've fallen apart. His words were everything I wanted to hear, but I wasn't ready to let him off the hook. James, it's not just about chores, I said, my voice firm. It's about respect. About standing by me when it matters. He nodded, his expression heavy with regret. You're right. And I swear I'll never be silent like that again. I'll never let her or anyone make you feel less than you are. I studied him, searching for any hint of insincerity, but there was none. Then he said something that surprised me. Linda wants to talk to you, he said quietly. She says she owes you an apology too. My stomach twisted. Of all the outcomes I'd imagined, this wasn't one of them. She said that. I asked, skeptical. He nodded. She's realized how wrong she was. I think these past few days have been a wake-up call for her too. I leaned back, letting his words sink in. A part of me wanted to reject the idea outright, to dismiss any possibility of Linda changing. But another part of me, the one that had hoped for years to be seen and valued, wanted to hear what she had to say. Still, I wasn't ready to make it easy. If she wants to apologize, I said, she'll have to come to me. James smiled faintly, relief flickering across his face.
She will.
I'll make sure of it. As we parted ways, I felt something I hadn't in days. Cautious hope. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like I was finally in control. That evening, I waited in Rachel's living room, my mind buzzing with unanswered questions. Linda wanted to apologize? The woman who laughed at my pain, who never missed a chance to undermine me, was suddenly remorseful? I couldn't decide if it was genuine or another manipulation. But one thing was clear. This time, I held the power. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to come to me on my terms. Rachel sat beside me, scrolling through her phone. So, what's your game plan? She asked casually, though her eyes gleamed with interest. If Linda shows up, are you going to let her grovel, or are you going straight for the jugular? I smirked, though my stomach churned with nerves. I'm not sure yet. I'll know when I see her face. Rachel grinned, raising her glass of wine. Well, whatever you do, make it count. Just then my phone buzzed. It was James. James, we'll be there in 20 minutes. She's nervous, but she's coming. The idea of Linda being nervous was almost laughable. This was a woman who thrived on control, who had never once shown a crack in her armor. The thought of her squirming in discomfort filled me with a strange satisfaction. 20 minutes later, a car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as James stepped out, followed by Linda. She looked different. Her usual air of superiority was replaced with something softer, almost hesitant. I stayed seated as the doorbell rang, letting Rachel answer. Come in, Rachel said brightly, her tone cheerful but laced with an edge I knew Linda wouldn't miss. She's waiting for you. James walked in first, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Linda followed, her step slower, her gaze flickering around the room as though searching for an escape route. When her eyes finally landed on me, she froze. For a moment, the room was silent, the air thick with tension. I didn't stand up. I wanted her to feel the weight of the moment, to understand that this wasn't going to be easy for her. Sit, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. My voice was calm, controlled, nothing like the trembling mess she'd seen at the dinner table days ago. Linda hesitated but obeyed, lowering herself into the chair. James sat beside her, his posture tense. Rachel lingered in the doorway, clearly enjoying the show. Linda cleared her throat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she began, her voice uncharacteristically small. I said things I shouldn't have. Hurtful things. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for more. Apologies from Linda weren't just rare, they were non-existent. I wasn't about to let her off with a few half-hearted sentences. I didn't realize how much you did for James, she continued, her voice faltering. For our family, these past few days they've been a wake-up call. Without you, things fell apart. There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. Still, I wasn't ready to let my guard down. And why did it take me leaving for you to see that? I asked, my tone sharp but measured. Why was it so easy for you to tear me down when I was there, trying my best? Linda flinched, her composure cracking. She glanced at James, but he didn't intervene. This was my moment and he knew it. I was wrong, Linda said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I was cruel. I don't have an excuse for it, but I want to make things right if you'll let me. Her words hung in the air, heavy with vulnerability. For the first time, I saw her as something other than a cold, unyielding force. She was human, flawed, afraid, and maybe even remorseful. But forgiveness wouldn't come easy. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. If we're going to move forward, things have to change. No more insults. No more undermining me. If you want to be part of my life, you have to respect me. Do you understand? Linda nodded, her eyes glistening.
AITA.
And I'll prove it to you. The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard, but I nodded, leaning back in my seat. Good, because this is your last chance. James reached for my hand, his grip firm, but gentle. Thank you, he said softly, his voice breaking, for giving us a chance to make things right. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect and it wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. And this time I knew my worth. They would never take me for granted again. The days that followed weren't an immediate return to normalcy, far from it. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a switch I could flip. It was a process, one I wasn't sure I'd ever fully complete. But for the first time in years, I wasn't the one chasing peace. They were. James started showing up at Rachel's house every day after work, bringing small gestures of reconciliation, a favorite snack, a bouquet of my favorite flowers, even a handwritten note apologizing for his silence. He didn't push me to come home. Instead, he focused on proving he understood the depth of his failure. Linda, however, was a different story. She was determined, almost uncomfortably so, to show that she had changed. She called me once a day, sometimes just to ask how I was feeling or share updates about the house. At first, I ignored her, unsure if this was genuine or just another power play. But her persistence wore me down. Slowly, her tone shifted, less demanding, more reflective. One afternoon, Linda surprised me by showing up unannounced. Rachel opened the door, her protective instincts kicking in immediately. "Is she expecting you?" she asked, blocking Linda's way. "No," Linda admitted, her hands gripping a small paper bag. "But I wanted to bring this. It's an olive branch." Rachel looked skeptical but stepped aside, her eyes narrowing as Linda walked in. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when I heard her hesitant footsteps. "I didn't mean to intrude," Linda began, stopping just short of the kitchen island. She held out the paper bag. "I brought these for you. Inside were homemade cookies, ones I'd mentioned in passing months ago that I loved." The gesture was so uncharacteristic that it left me momentarily speechless. "Thank you," I said cautiously, setting the bag down. "But I'm not sure cookies are going to fix everything." She winced, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I know. I wanted to try." I put the knife down and crossed my arms, facing her fully. "Why now, Linda? Why suddenly care about how I feel? About making things right?" Her eyes dropped to the floor, and for a moment, she was silent. When she spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Because I saw what it did to James when you left. And I saw what it did to me." She hesitated, her hands wringing nervously. "I thought I was protecting him, keeping him from a mistake. But I was the one who was wrong. You weren't the problem, I was." The admission hung in the air, heavier than I expected. I searched her face for any sign of manipulation but found none. She looked tired,
Defeated. Human.
"I don't expect you to forgive me overnight," she continued, her voice breaking. "But I'll keep trying, even if it takes the rest of my life. You're part of this family, and I should have treated you like it from the start." The vulnerability in her words caught me off guard. For years, I'd dreamed of hearing something like this, but now that it was here, I didn't know how to respond. A part of me wanted to stay angry, to make her earn every bit of forgiveness. But another part, a quieter, softer part, wanted to believe her. "I need time," I said finally, my voice steady but firm. "This isn't something I can just forget." Linda nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "I understand. Thank you for even considering it." When she left, I sat down at the table, staring at the cookies she'd brought. Rachel joined me, her expression unreadable. "That was unexpected," she said. "Yeah," I agreed, my thoughts swirling. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just about Linda's apology or James's gestures. It was about me. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking to fit their expectations. I was standing tall, and they were rising to meet me. The story wasn't over, but it was finally heading toward a chapter one could live with. And this time, I'd make sure I was the author of my own narrative. The following week, I made my decision. It wasn't impulsive or emotional. It was deliberate, grounded in everything I had experienced. Forgiveness wasn't about letting someone off the hook. It was about reclaiming my power and deciding what I was willing to accept moving forward. James and I met at a park near Rachel's house, the same one where we'd gone on one of our first dates years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was already there when I arrived, pacing nervously by a bench. When he saw me, relief softened his features, but he stayed rooted in place, waiting for me to make the first move. I sat down, taking a moment to gather my thoughts before speaking. "I've thought a lot about everything," I began, my voice steady.
About us.
"About Linda. About what I want for my life." He nodded, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. "And I'm willing to come back," I said slowly, watching his shoulders sag with relief. "But there are conditions." "Anything," he said quickly, leaning toward me. "I'll do whatever it takes." I held up a hand to stop him. "This isn't just about promises, James. It's about action. I need to see that you're capable of standing up for me, even when it's uncomfortable." I need to know that you're willing to prioritize us, our marriage, over keeping the peace with Linda. I will, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I swear I'll do better. I'll prove it to you. I nodded, believing him, but knowing time would be the true test. And Linda? If she ever disrespects me like that again, I'm gone. No more second chances. His jaw tightened, and he nodded. She knows. I've already made that clear to her. That was the reassurance I needed. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that things could truly be different. A few days later, I returned home. The house felt both familiar and foreign, like stepping into an old photograph you hadn't seen in years. James had cleaned, cooked, and even rearranged some furniture, small but thoughtful gestures to show he was trying. Linda visited a week later, and this time, she was different. Quieter, more measured in her words. She didn't try to dominate the conversation or nitpick my choices. Instead, she asked questions, real questions about my interests, my work, my dreams. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Months passed, and the wounds began to heal, slowly and unevenly. James's actions spoke louder than words, and Linda, to my surprise, made good on her promise to change. There were moments of tension, of course. Change was never linear, but I stood firm in my boundaries, and they respected them. Looking back, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about them. It was about me. I had spent so much of my life trying to please others, shrinking myself to avoid conflict, that I had forgotten my own worth. Leaving wasn't just about teaching them a lesson. It was about proving to myself that I deserved better. And I did. To the women reading this, especially those who felt unseen or unappreciated, your worth isn't defined by what you do for others. It's defined by how you see yourself and the boundaries you set. It's never too late to stand up, to walk away, or to demand better. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remind the world and yourself what you deserve.